I reached out to you probably about 2 years ago, maybe just sort of randomly, and shared with you some of my thoughts about polyvagal and how it applied in schools. And your response was, yes, this is very relevant for our schools. And I think we both even at that first initial connection, agreed that we really weren't doing a great job of cultivating safety in our schools. And so I'm not certain for folks who may be watching this, if they're familiar with what the polyvagal is and what it has to do with safety. So maybe can you just take like a few moments?
I'll try.
Yeah, I know. That's always a challenge to explain what that
basically, is. The theory focuses about the importance of our physiological state. That if our physiological state is more revved up, more aroused, we're more likely to be reactive. And if our physiology is calmer, we're more accessible and engaging, and we actually interact with others. But it's very intuitive, but it also creates a metaphor that can be measured you can measure people's heart rate and neural control of their heart and of their viscera through the vagus. That's how it gets its name. But the polyvagal theory really says, be aware of your physiological state because it will serve to be your foundational platform upon which your behavior emerges. So don't think of behavior as just being behavior, and don't think of it if you misbehave that, it's merely a intentional volitional behavior. Sometimes if it's more, and parents, of course, will know this, the acting out of what they can see in the activity and physiology of their child. And what the theory gives you is a language to see, and literally to see what's underneath the skin, and to remove, I'm going to use the term, inappropriate behaviors from being bad to seeing them as a nervous system that is trying to defend that person's body inappropriately. So in a sense, reading cues of danger where a calm person says, oh, that's just life. So we have to understand that we perceive and react to the world literally as a function of our physiological state. And therefore, our schools need to stop, in the sense, bullying our kids if they have difficulty in sitting still, because that sitting still is far from a simple intentional behavior. Right. It's really first of all, I'm a parent, but my kids are now older, but now I'm reliving what they went through with my granddaughter. So I'm learning that schools haven't changed. And
no, they have not.
if your child has, let's say, doesn't fit the cookie cutter mold of a compliant child, you're going to have problems. You're going to be pulled out and tested, sent to physicians, and which the school system may be praying for pharmaceutical interventions to make the child more manageable within the classroom.
Absolutely. In fact, the last time that you and I chatted, you revealed that you actually got sort of, to some degree, started in this work because of your own personal experiences with one of your sons, right?
When I was floating through the world of, my earlier work had been in developmental psychology, and I always was interested in individual differences. And I was looking for, as physiological models, and actually that's how the polyvagal theory actually evolved. But when the theory evolved, it created this understanding of who we are as a social mammal, that we're on a journey of sociality. And it's when we're, in a sense, put into states of threat that sociality deteriorates. And what you and I are discussing is, what does a school do to the nervous system of vulnerable children? It's very threatening to them, and their bodies go into states of threat, which doesn't allow sociality to emerge. The body's in a state of threat. And we can even ask the questions, how many kids have gut problems and don't want to go to school? Mm-hmm. And how do we read those gut problems? We say, well, go to school, or stop bothering me. I want that. I did it. You should be able to do it. And that's extremely disrespectful. And what polyvagal theory, it gives us a way of honoring the body's reactivity, as opposed to, in a sense, disciplining it with a basically imprisoning who we are, allowing us to understand our vulnerabilities and not to be shamed by our vulnerabilities. And
So
yeah,
that piece that you're speaking to, though, I think this is really very revolutionary in many ways. The piece about, and you talk about this a lot in your theory, that the vast majority of pro-social behaviors or quote unquote appropriate behaviors are behaviors that spontaneously emerge when a child is experiencing a regulated physiological state.
So you sent me an email with a link, which I didn't open because I didn't need to open it. The title was enough. And the answer is we've been given blinders. We think that social behavior is learned or taught and can be conditioned.
Wait, just stop there. Just stop there. I want everyone to hear that again.
Well, show me some examples in which this has been successful.
Right.
You can punish a child sufficiently that they will not do certain adverse behaviors.
Right.
But they will not be spontaneously social or engaging. One of the strategies with autistic kids was this. Remember this one?
Oh, yes.
And when they make the eye contact, what do their faces look like? They're in terror because the physiology of avoidance or eye gaze avoidance is because the eye gaze is threatening. Yeah. And if you want to see it in other primates, go into a monkey colony of rhesus monkeys and just make eye contact with them. They will go ballistic because it's a threat behavior. It's wired into the nervous system. So somewhere along the line, I would go back to maybe 1910 or 1920 when Watson started to say, give me a beggar, a thief, I'll just condition them. And then, of course, Skinner moved it further. And then by the 1970s, even clinical psychology was, can we identify the response history, the rewards, and we can manipulate it. And it was never about the underlying physiological state or the feelings. Now, behavior mod has its place, but where was it good? It was good in upregulating behaviors you wanted, not very good in downregulating behaviors you didn't want.
Oh, I like that. I really like that. That's something that's another piece of this that I don't think I've heard you say.
But think about it. Think about it within schools.
Yeah.
Does it get rid of those behaviors, or does it force more of a physiological shutdown, withdrawal? In a sense, in the clinical world, we would
it's a dissociated state.
Right, exactly. Yes. It's and if you were to interview the child 30 years later, they would describe it as traumatic.
Yes. Even as somebody who had some training, by ABA therapists in doing that kind of treatment with children, you can feel that in your body when you're doing that way of being with kids. It doesn't feel right in your body if you're alive in your body experience, because it feels manipulated. It feels, what's the word I'm looking for? It feels contrived.
It's contrived because interactions are co-regulatory. Mm-hmm. So it's not merely that you are giving something to the other person is reciprocating. And you see that in facial expressivity and gesture. Yeah. But in the behavior mod model, that's not the primary parts.
Right.
They might argue within a behavioral viewpoint that you just haven't found the right behaviors to reward. And I would say they're partially correct on that. But there's this intervening variable, the physiological state. Now, I'm not totally foreign to ABA. I was invited by the ABAI, the international meeting, to give a B.F. Skinner talk, which was really quite interesting because I talked about a SOR model that would be effective using behavioral modification, the O being the physiological state. So if you were aware of the state that the child was in, then the manipulations could be much more effective and efficient.
Yeah, I still think I have some tenets. I still think some of the tenets of that kind of thinking, though, sort of, it makes us not beings.
I always so if you read like Walden 2 by Skinner, the undergraduate books that some of us read, you left reading that saying that he Skinner was treating the external world as if it was totally manipulatable, but not his internal world.
Yeah.
Now, I when I was a young faculty member, I knew his daughter. She was a colleague, so I had some little interactions on these levels. So
yeah. So what do you think? So first off, like, that our conference for the spring is polyvagal focused. That's what every workshop session is going to be about. Mm. And actually, we should talk about this for a moment, which is that you have big news that I don't know that a lot of folks know about yet, which is the Polyvagal Institute. Mm. So do you want to just explain to our audience what that is and why that was established?
So the gentleman who was on briefly was Randall Redfield, and Randall is the director of our not-for-profit institute called Polyvagal Institute, and it has one basic goal, and that is really the communication of information regarding polyvagal theory into different niches, different applied areas. And what we're really, so it's been within areas of trauma and psychiatry and mental health. But what we're really now asking questions, what about education? What about the business world? And so we're developing modules for educators. And,
yes. So why this though? Why did you feel?
The reason we're doing this is that so I come from a very academic laboratory science orientation. And my world of getting into, quote, the public or mental health world has been through the people in the world of trauma, pulling me in and then informing me all about trauma. And I became a student. In a sense, I like to solve problems. I deconstruct it, and I start really to learn about trauma and start to get insights that many of them couldn't get because they were imposing a treatment model on them, just like we're talking about education. But I was taking an observer's model, and I was learning not merely from my colleagues, but from their clients who would often attend these meetings and send me emails. I would learn from the feedback that I was getting. And the two areas that are really impinging now into my personal space, one has been education, and the other one has been the business world. And we're finding, they're the same basic principles. The principles are, what are we like as a species when we are supported, when we're safe? And the problem is we have a vocabulary that is basically meaningless to all of us, because it's like we use the word safe, and then people say, well, what's there to be afraid of? There's nothing going on here. Therefore, you're safe. But that's not what safety means. Safety means the body is safe enough to regulate its internal organs and to spontaneously engage others. And so with kids who are on spectrum and even ADHD, their bodies are not in states of accessibility, right, not in states of spontaneous social engagement. And if you're a good observer, watch them on the playground. They're not interactive in the same way. So even though they may want to play, they're not picking up the cues of the other person. So the classmates don't want to play with them for a practical reason. They'll get injured. Play is a complex interaction in which intention is critical, because if a mistake is made, it gets remediated by a smile and an excuse me, and can I help you get off the ground? Right. If we walk away and say, oh, it was my fault, we go into our cognitive realm, you don't have good interactions. It's all about the body's interpretation of these cues.
So going back to what you're saying, then you established the institute to sort of help disseminate the application.
Well, I left an important point out.
Okay, trying to bring it back there.
Thank you so much. We all have these experiences.
Yeah, I do it too. I get it.
What we start to realize, what those of us who are very polyvagal, quote, informed, realize that polyvagal had gone generic, which meant, as we know, when things go generic, everyone is creative. And you want the ideas to be created and embedded, but you don't want them distorted. You want to have, in a sense, let's say you want to be true to the principles. And you don't want to, because lots of specialty. What I remember from some mental health strategies is everyone breaks off and has their own school. And I want the core of polyvagal theory to be embedded in many people's schools. So I didn't want to compete. I wanted to collaborate, and I wanted to, in a sense, in a almost uncomfortable word, I wanted to create a structure to certify that they had at least gotten the basic foundational material of what the theory is before they reinvented it or invented something and used its name. So the idea was to create boundaries of what the theory is and what it's not. But the most important part was to basically enable. I don't even want to use the word empowerment, because empowerment almost goes into the disciple world. But allow other people to take the material and express their creativity. And I'm seeing this in the world of education and now in the world of business. And if a scientist ever wants to see a scientist express a feeling of gratitude, it's when their ideas are used.
Yeah.
And not distorted. So the idea is that there'll be a place to get the information.
Right. So, which is partly why we were so excited to reach out to you and say, we want to make the spring conference focused on felt safety and what that means in polyvagal terms. Because I do feel as though of all the things I've ever learned about in terms of human behavior, nothing comes close to really explaining so much of the human experience as your theory does. And it explains so much of things that I was always wrestling with. Yeah. And it's, nothing is perfect. Nothing is going to be the whole answer. But for me, it's a conceptual framework that really makes things make sense. And it helps me when I look back on the ways that I worked with children that really did work. And when I think about it through a polyvagal lens, I'm like, yeah, I had their bodies moving. We were making rhythm together. We were, there was so
looking
much
at each other.
Yes,
we were looking at each other.
Yeah, and it was genuine. There was authentic connection happening, and that's what made those experiences transformative.
So we start developing words like we're present, but there's something within our society that's gone amiss, and that is we tend to be horrible witnesses of others. Yeah. And what polyvagal theory kind of teaches us, it's almost Buddhist in its nature. It's like we're not evaluating, but we're learning and we're understanding, and we're in a sense seeing not just the overt behavior, but beneath the skin, what's going on. And we can see that this is a complex organism that is on the quest. The quest is to stay alive and be safe. And if the body is detecting cues, the body, not the teacher, and not someone else in the room, but this one individual is detecting cues of threat, everything changes. And we are such a culture that says, if I survived this, I got through that, you should. Tough love, tough teaching, tough working. And I mean, I am overwhelmed because I've gone through life, life's been reasonable. It's treated me well, and I've treated other people well. But when you start hearing how other people have felt in their life experiences, including when they were in school, where when things happened, my memories of that was say, so let it go. This is, quote, the system, or this is how you have to get through it. Right. But it was never internalized. And when you talk to adults, which I'm sure you do, they're often bemoaning something that happened to them, this embarrassing moment, or being bullied, or being shamed. And this has changed them totally. The term I now use, it retuned their nervous system, and it retuned it to be much more skeptical, much more tentative. It retuned them not to be spontaneous and interact.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times what you're describing, people talk about in terms of trust, like in that there are those people who are willingly trustful of others. And then there's those people who over time have learned not to trust. And I think that's
that's interesting because you used the word learned there. So in a sense, it's very basic because they're viscerally conditioned. They get a bodily reaction, and that bodily reaction says danger, I'm staying away. And many children feel that way about school.
Yes.
And their bodily reactions are accurate because for those children, this is a vulnerable place.
So how do you see the pandemic and this past year compounding all of the things that we already were struggling with in education? What do you think the new kind of, that's not the right way to put it, but what's the prevailing threat that you see for our kids right now?
Okay.
And adults, and the educators too.
Okay. We're in a strain. Well, my own narrative on this is stay seated because we're going to be hit with a second pandemic, which is the consequence of this pandemic, which has to do with children not being with their peer groups. And worse than that, children being functionally imprisoned in homes that are not safe, families having issues regarding food security. Remember, this is marriages and family units are not idealistically secure. There's dynamics occurring, and some of those dynamics have to do with basic survival needs of resources. So those things just get ramped up. And also, if we look at the abuse and trauma histories of children, even before the pandemic, 25 to over 30% of the girls, the women, the young girls actually, we're talking about young ones, and about 15 to 20% of the males, the boys, have sexual and physical abuse histories. I mean, we're talking about large numbers, and that was when they had the flexibility of not being quarantined.
Right.
So I have no idea what's going to come out. We already know other things are coming out because we know that a lot of people have, quote, long haul syndrome from the virus. Yeah. Well, long haul syndrome is really you can see it in polyvagal systems. If your body it basically got the virus when it was in a state of threat, that's a pre-existing condition. And the consequences now is your body retuned. Mm. So the part, what we have forgotten is that trauma histories or chronic stress, whatever term we are more comfortable in using, is a pre-existing condition, and it may change our outcomes. In our own research, it certainly changes the perception of the threat of the pandemic. So people with trauma histories have retuned subjectively their autonomic nervous system. We have data on that. And their outcomes, are they more worry, more depression, more anxiety?
Mm-hmm. We're definitely seeing that in the clients that we serve and the folks that we consult and train with, that there's the educators. I mean, that's who we serve. The educators and school leaders, they're reporting much higher levels. They already were fairly traumatized, to be honest, with their work, but this has compounded that.
So there's another study which I'm involved in where they looked at mental health workers and medical health workers mm-hmm. versus a normal pre-pandemic population. And the medical workers are really in bad shape.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, I know we're going to talk about it in our conference, and this is what the focus is going to be, but what do you think needs to be the essential priority if we're going to actually try and heal some of this wound that we've had to collectively endure?
We have to first learn to be good listeners. And what I'm saying is, as a culture, we're all about fixing. And when we say we're going to fix something, we're communicating to those that we want to fix that there's something wrong with that.
Yeah.
So we're really confounding their own vulnerability with our good intentions. So we have to develop different language We have to
Oh,
talk
God,
about
yes.
a shared journey of optimal expression or optimal development. It's tough because schools, if you think of schools and medical systems or as being the same, they're all about evaluation. And if
Mm-hmm.
you ask yourself as an adult, when you go to a hospital for whatever tests you're getting or whatever your fears are, how is your body reacting until you get that piece of paper that says everything's okay? Or
Right.
what happens when they say it's not? So it's just what I'm saying, the metaphor or the parallel is so close to the day-to-day actions or activities and experience of a child who's being evaluated all the time.
All the time. I was really disappointed, not to bring in the political, but I was super disappointed to see the Biden administration just mandate that all states have to resume state testing this year. I'm like, are you kidding me? I thought this was the new day that was dawning.
Well, you see, I sit back and say, um, I hate to use this term, be patient, because
Okay.
there are too many massive things that are happening and too many big things can't be remedied at once. We have to first get out of the pandemic. We second have to make sure that there's a more equitable distribution of resources because
Mm-hmm.
that's really hurting a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll see where it goes.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Steve, this has been, how long have we been chatting? 25 minutes?
Yeah.
And do we have any comments or anything that I need to reply to? Okay, we're good to go. This was awesome. I'm so excited to have you with us. And
Yeah.
I look forward to partnering further with the Polyvagal Institute. And, you know,
Well, I think we have a shared agenda. I think we have to change how schools run. We
yeah.
have to also change how teachers are treated. It's not, in a sense, we have to place them higher on that hierarchy of professions,
Yeah.
so that they're what they get paid, their resources, and I mean, we're in a society that doesn't uh, have universal preschool or universal daycare or whatever
Yeah.
you want to go. We don't think of taking care of our children. And we have to take care, when we say take care of them, they have to get cues of safety. Because
Mm-hmm.
when those cues of safety are, then the boldness, the creativity, and the love and trust come out.
Yeah.
So if we beat up on the kids, their creativity is really stifled, but so is their benevolence and their ability to relate to others, the joy we get when we hug our children.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly. And that doesn't come in a lesson plan.
No, it doesn't.
No, it doesn't. So thanks so much. And we'll talk again.
Looking forward to it.
Take good care. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye. All right.